AskReddit by Stephanie Slitus. What is your horror story from DNA tests like 23andMe? My parents and I all did DNA tests and I managed their profiles. Theirs were done before mine was available. They each got a panicked message from a woman on the other side of the world who had matched as their daughter. She was distraught, thinking her parents had lied to her for her entire life. When I logged into my account, it showed that I had no DNA matches with my parents, which I knew to be wrong. Plus the fact my mum was a young child when this woman was born made it clear the company had swapped our results. Customer service just said oh well and offered a new test. My family found it funny, but that poor woman who had spent several days freaking out thinking her life was a lie before I got her messages and responded. For a moment there, I thought this was going to be a hospital baby swap situation. Phew. One of my cousins was not really my cousin. My cousin died in Vietnam and this guy that was in his platoon or whatever took his identity. Edit. This happened years ago and the cousin is much older than me. After some clarification from old relatives, it was my cousin that disappeared and took someone's identity. He was then located by a DNA test his kids took and was reunited with our family. Lucky us. This sounds like Don Draper's Korean War origin story. My mom's generation has been really big into tracing our family tree. Turns out grandpa had two families, that we know of, that lived down the street from each other. If that wasn't enough to discourage my family from uncovering skeletons, a few years later one of my cousins took a 23andMe test to find out that our maternal grandfather is also her dad. Edit. For those asking, the cousin in question is the daughter of my mother's sister. So we're thinking some downright unholy things went on. Unclear as my grandfather and aunt are both dead now. How terrible for your aunt. Did your cousin mention it to her mother? Not me, but my co-worker found out his bio dad was not who he thought he was. Turns out he is one of the many children of fertility Dr. Donald Klein. There's a Netflix doc about him if you've never heard about him. I just asked someone on another comment if their situation was related to this case. I can't believe he did what he did. Dr. Klein story. https://time.com/6176310/our-father-true-story-netflix/close bracket. My sister found out that half our mom's side of the family are products of incest. Up and until a few great aunts and uncles. When my sister started doing genealogy, she found out that my grandparents, dad's parents, were first cousins. Appalachia in the 40s. Cousin marriages were pretty common lol. About 3 years ago, I took a 23andMe test because I always had suspected, or maybe hoped, that my sister's dad was also my dad. He was in my life from the beginning because my bio dad was a piece of work. Well, he isn't my father, and neither is a man who I grew up believing was my dad. My sister-in-law did some digging and found my real biological father. He's the one who reached out, did a DNA test, wanted to meet me and my children and introduce me to my siblings. For a while I held off because it was such a shock and I felt like it was moving really quickly. 4 months after we had first started talking, we met and I was welcomed with open arms by everyone. And even though it was still a little weird and I was super nervous, I am glad I took the chance to meet him. He died from COVID complications just 8 months after we found out he was my real dad. I'm so glad you got the chance to meet him. You probably made him so happy. Grew up pretty normal for the most part, divorced parents but happy life. Wanted to know how my ancestry since I don't know past my paternal great-grandmother's maiden name. Got the results this past Christmas Eve. Found a half-sister, along with 2 other half-siblings, that is too old to be my dad's. He'd have been a literal child, and put 2 and 2 together and it turns out my dad is not my father. Can't ask my mom. She's dead. My bio father is dead and no one knows anything, and the people I have told, no one on my dad's side, too scared to break that news. are shocked. I know nothing about this man but his name and his mom's name, who is also gone, I believe. I just find out this big ol' bombshell so suddenly and then hit a dead end just as quickly. It was an interesting and juicy Christmas for sure. I'm 55% Swiss though, which is random as hell. I came back 75% Swiss, which shocked the hell out of my Scottish family. 5 years later I got an email with some updates that told me I am 75% Scottish now. Found out, doing the Ancestry DNA, that my paternal grandmother cheated on her husband with her, also married, family doctor. My dad has brothers and a sister that he never knew about. Dad says that the doctor must have known. He looks exactly like his brothers, and the doc used to always call him son during his appointments. His dad, that raised him, also must have known, cause he treated him like crap, and made backhanded comments that, knowing what we know now, tell us he knew. Or suspected at the very least. When I was growing up, it was really common for older men to refer to any random younger male as son, particularly where there was an authority figure type situation. That language usage itself may be completely meaningless from what the doctor did or did not know. Someone in my grandparents' generation gave up a baby for adoption 60 years ago and our family still doesn't know, won't admit who it was. She only joined 23andMe because her daughters encouraged her to find out more about her birth family for health reasons. We now have family members who won't take the test. Stuff like this was surprisingly common back then. They'd either give the baby away, or the parents would raise them as a new sibling with a massive age gap. My kid took the test, and 8 years later, introduced me to a half-sister I never knew I had. My father had remarried and had a son I knew about, but this younger sister took us both by surprise. And the father in all this has passed on, so I got a sister now. Free sister. Well, it's not my horror story. But, police arrested the guy who murdered my mother, decades ago, because someone in the killer's family used one of those tests. The submitted DNA allowed them to get a match on a grandparent, and a couple of years later, when they subpoenaed his DNA to corroborate their other police work, he confessed. It took 40 years, but I imagine this is a hell of a horror story for him. He wasn't ever a suspect before the DNA match. I'm sorry you lost your mom, and she deserves justice. My cousin trying to scam the government claiming minuscule percentage Native American submitted a sample. What did happen was 4 children he fathered with 4 women other than current wives found him. This is extra funny because just having Native American DNA isn't enough to get any government support. You need membership in a tribe, and absolutely no tribe is going to include you based on a very small percentage of your DNA. My great-grandfather was born on a reservation and I don't have and could never get tribe membership. The DNA test could only ever hurt his scam, TBH. Found out my dad isn't my biological father. My dad's sister gave me a DNA test for the holidays. I ended up taking it and discovered I wasn't related to my aunt, aka not related to my dad. But I have 10 plus half siblings with whoever my sperm donor daddies. They gaslit me for months saying the results were inaccurate, called me a liar to my sister, all this garbage. Then finally admitted it was true after 6+ months of lying. We now have a terrible relationship. Sorry they did that to you. Do you think your aunt knew all along? We always knew my grandma had my dad before she got married, but through Ancestry we found out she actually had another baby after my dad, but before she got married, different dads. I found out via church records that my grandparents got married because grandma was pregnant. It was a stillborn and they never told their children. One of my best friends called me one day in a panic. She did one with her father for fun. He is not her father. Turns out mummy has many skeletons in the closet. Bio dad never knew she existed and was so happy to find her. We now doubt her sister's father is her father. Just a gigantic domino effect of not good. Man, poor dad. The one who raised her, I mean. Shitty mom though. My mother was one of 7 children of an abusive mother and beloved father. 20 grandchildren, my cousins, my brother and me. Through testing, some cousins have determined that at least 3 of the 7 children were not the biological offspring of my grandmother's husband. We aren't telling all the other cousins until the last uncle dies, he's 93. That's the kindest way to handle it. No need to break the old uncle's heart. My father is from a country that is literally split in half. Half the country is ethnically Greek and the other half is ethnically Turkish. There is a long history of bad blood and our capital is split down the middle. We are culturally Greek, but thanks to my brother's impulse decision DNA test, we learned that we are ethnically more Turkish. Not really a horror story, but goes to show how stupid war is. Ah yes, my husband's family is Cypriot, came to Australia in the 50s. We were never allowed to mention to his YIA that her favorite Greek cake shop had closed and we now got her cakes from a Turkish shop instead, and we definitely could not point out that her own mother was half Turkish. Summary: got their parents arrested for murder. It's not my story but one known around Ireland. In the 1980s, a dead baby was found on a beach in South Kerry. It had been stabbed many times. A massive investigation occurred, and there were appeals for the mother to come forward. In Ireland's dark past, we have treated women and especially unmarried mothers terribly. A woman on the opposite side of the county was wrongly accused of killing the baby and dumping it 3 hours away. She had given birth to a baby who was stillborn, which they buried on their farmland. Her family was coerced into signing false confessions by our police force that she had killed the baby in South Kerry, even though she did not. Fast forward to 2022, there was suddenly a middle-aged married couple from South Kerry who were arrested on suspicion of killing the baby. Their child, who was in their 20s, submitted their DNA to an Ancestry site. They got hits, and one of them was for murdered baby found on the beach. They haven't been convicted. The trial hasn't happened yet. What happened to the innocent woman? Was she in prison that whole time? I actually found out I have the cancer gene from one of these tests, BRCA1, and my whole family was tested as well. My sister, brother and dad all have it too. We now get preventative cancer testing, but who knows, it could have very well saved one of our lives down the road. Not really horror story overall, but when I first found out it was extremely scary, as I was just expecting to get some entertaining report back and instead found out I had a serious health condition. Oh man, I feel that. My grandfather died relatively young of pancreatic cancer. My mum was at a BBQ and found out her cousin had breast cancer, and from that discovered she had BRCA2. Neglected to tell her extended family straight away. Go figure. Mum got tested, she has it. My auntie got tested, got a mammogram and found out she had breast cancer and had to get a double mastectomy. It totally changed my mum. She's become paranoid about getting sick and constantly gets health checks. Some of my family, siblings and cousins are too scared to get tested still. Apparently my bio father was a racist alcoholic who was infatuated with the military, although he never enlisted. He would routinely imitate naval officers, get caught and do time, wandered from marriage to marriage, usually under a false name, and produced 6 of us children from various women. The 3 sons are dead from drug overdoses in their 30s, the others of us are little old ladies now. My best friend's father is my father. We were 40 when we found out. We were born 7 months apart, meaning her mother, my mom's best friend, was very pregnant when I was conceived. Oh. Not me, but I have 2 from people I know personally. First one is my aunt and uncle were married 4 years and had multiple kids. Eventually my uncle passed, a few years go by, and my aunt receives a Facebook message from a random girl, saying she found out through 23andMe that they were relatives. Come to find out my uncle had been cheating on my aunt, and the random girl was his biological daughter. Probably not an uncommon story, but definitely a horror for my aunt to find out he was living a lie for 25+ years. Second story is crazy but wholesome. Also, my friend found out she was adopted through doing 23andMe. Crazy part is that growing up, she was always told she was a twin, has a sister the same age, they looked enough alike not to be questioned as fraternal, but truthfully they were never biologically related at all. Her adoptive parents never told them about it. Then 1 year after her parents had died, she receives a DNA kit as a gift just for fun, and finds out the truth. The wholesome part though is that she was able to connect with her biological father, who apparently never even knew about her, but always wanted a child. So she gained an extra parent figure, and he gained the daughter he always hoped for. Odd story, but ultimately a really nice outcome. One of my great uncles got contacted by a woman who said he was her father after she took a test through one of those sites. He denied it vehemently, and it caused some strife in the family until it was revealed that it was actually his older brother who was the father. Turns out he was kind of a cad in his youth, and never found out until now. As in, his older brother is an identical twin? How else did they mix them up? I did Ancestry DNA a few years ago. Found out my father sexually assaulted over 50 women. Through siblings or court records. Not a horror story, but the opposite. My mom always told me my father wasn't my biological father. I hated her for telling me and didn't want to believe it. A few years after I did 23andMe, I checked my shared DNA list and saw a cousin I was close to, from my paternal side. I was so relieved and happy and thankful I never told anyone what my mom told me.